Sometimes, life doesn't unravel in the middle of a storm. It comes undone in the silence between heartbeats, when the world looks ordinary, but your foundation quietly splits beneath your feet. Pregnant wife forgets cell phone at home, returns to see cheating husband with mistress. She cries. The autumn morning stretched lazily across Elm Ridge, Oregon, as Julia Madden hurried through the corridors of Crestwood High School. Her chestnut curls, hastily pulled into a messy bun, bounced with each step. A worn canvas messenger bag filled with student essays and her beloved copy of Jane Eyre swayed against her hip. At 32 and 7 months pregnant, even this familiar walk from her classroom to the parking lot felt longer these days. The poetry slam would be her last event before maternity leave, and the thought of leaving her students mid-semester weighed heavily on her mind. She'd barely slept the night before, her mind filled with late grades, lesson plans, and a lingering sense that she was somehow letting everyone down, her students, her unborn child, herself. Even in her proudest role, teacher, she felt stretched too thin, like she was holding it all together with tape and hope. The drive home was short, just 15 minutes through tree-lined streets, where craftsman-style houses stood proud against the October sky. Julia couldn't shake the nagging feeling about her forgotten phone. Ethan had been acting distant lately, checking his own phone obsessively, speaking in hushed tones. She dismissed it as pregnancy hormones, but the unease clung to her like morning mist. Her house, a cozy 2-story with forest green shutters, looked somehow different as she pulled into the driveway. Maybe it was the way the light hit the windows. Or maybe it was the unfamiliar car parked across the street, a sleek black Lexus she'd seen around town before, but couldn't quite place. The front door opened silently under her touch. Julia had always loved how the hardwood floors creaked beneath her feet, telling stories of the home's history. But today, those creaks felt like warnings. Her phone lay on the kitchen counter, screen dark and accusatory. Next to it, a half-empty wine glass, yesterday's but not hers. Then she heard it, a laugh, female, young, coming from upstairs. Julia's heart began to race, her fingertips going cold despite the warm autumn air. Each step up the staircase felt like a climb toward something inevitable, her pregnant body heavy with dread. Every muscle ached with resistance, but something stronger than fear, an instinct, a knowing, pulled her forward. The sound of whispers grew louder, punctuated by familiar male laughter. Ethan's. But it sounded different, lighter, freer. The master bedroom door was ajar, sunlight spilling through the crack like a spotlight on a stage. Julia's hand trembled as she pushed it open. The wood was smooth beneath her palm. Time seemed to stretch like taffy as the scene came into devastating focus. Ethan, his usually neat hair now a mess, shirt unbuttoned, sat at the edge of their bed. Straddling his lap was a woman, Betrayal Adams. Her blouse hung open, lipstick, that lipstick, the shade Julia had complimented at last month's company mixer, smeared across Ethan's neck. The world tilted. Julia gripped the doorframe, her other hand protectively covering her belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her mother's pain. The movement grounded her, kept her from floating away into the nightmare unfolding before her. In that moment, she wasn't a teacher, a wife, or even a mother-to-be. She was simply a woman whose world had just been shattered, with no warning, no dignity, no chance to brace for the blow. "Julia." Ethan's voice cracked as he shoved Betrayal aside and stood awkwardly. "I can explain, this isn't." But Julia wasn't listening. Her eyes were locked on Betrayal's, who had the gall to look more annoyed than ashamed. The girl's perfectly manicured fingers smoothed her wrinkled skirt, her expression a blend of defiance and calculated concern. "How long?" Julia's voice came out stronger than she expected, even surprising herself. "Baby, please." Ethan stepped forward, reaching for her. "Don't." The word sliced through the air like a blade. "How long?" Betrayal spoke first, her voice like honey laced with poison. "Does it matter?" she said sweetly. "We both know your marriage has been falling apart. Ethan needs someone who can keep up with him, someone who understands his drive, not someone settling into a quiet little life of diapers and suburban routine." The words struck like physical blows, but Julia stood firm. She thought of her students, of the lessons she'd taught them, that literature's most powerful truths came when characters faced their darkest moments. Now, standing in her own bedroom, watching her marriage shatter like fine crystal, she finally understood those lessons in a way she never had before. Without another word, Julia turned and walked away. Her footsteps were steady, deliberate, despite the quake inside her chest. She grabbed her phone from the kitchen counter, ignoring Ethan's voice calling from the stairs. Outside, the autumn air felt sharp in her lungs, thick with the scent of fallen leaves and finality. In the car, hands clenched tightly on the steering wheel, Julia finally allowed herself to cry. But even as tears blurred her vision, her thoughts were already shifting. To the one person she hadn't spoken to in years. The only person who might be able to help her rebuild. Her sister, Camilla. Julia's hands trembled as she pulled into the parking lot of the Hillside Inn, a modest motel just off the main road. Her phone had buzzed non-stop, 17 missed calls from Ethan. Each one another crack in the fragile version of the future she had built. She powered it off. The screen faded to black, just like the life she'd imagined. The motel room was tidy but sparse, with faded floral wallpaper and a small window looking out at the highway. Julia sat on the edge of the bed, hands cradling her belly, feeling her daughter's restless kicks. "We're okay," she whispered, though the words rang hollow. "We're going to be okay." In the bathroom mirror, her reflection told another story. Dark circles under her eyes, mascara tracing black trails down her cheeks. She looked like one of the tragic heroines she lectured about in class, maybe Anna Karenina before the train, or Clarissa Dalloway in her quiet despair. She ran cold water from the faucet, splashing her face, each drop a biting reminder of the reality she now faced. From the distance, the steady hum of trucks on the highway created a rhythm beneath her swirling thoughts. She needed a plan. More than that, she needed help. Camilla's contact info stared back at her from the phone screen. They hadn't had a real conversation in months, not since that disastrous Thanksgiving in Ashland when old wounds cracked open over pumpkin pie and tight smiles. What had once been a close sisterhood had faded into an exchange of obligatory birthday texts and generic holiday messages. Ghosts of their bond lingered in every awkward interaction. Julia pressed call before she could talk herself out of it. Each ring stretched like forever. "Julia." Camilla's voice was crisp, professional. She was probably still at her firm in downtown Portland, surrounded by the rigid order she upheld in every corner of her life. "Cammy." The nickname slipped out, an echo of childhood, and Julia's voice cracked. I need help." The silence that followed said more than words. Julia could picture her sister now, sitting perfectly upright in her ergonomic chair, fingers reflexively straightening a stack of documents, already sorting the chaos hidden in Julia's voice. "Where are you?" Camilla's tone was direct. Practical, pure Camilla. "Hillside Inn, room 114. Julia swallowed. "Ethan? He?" Paper rustled on the other end. "I'm leaving now. Have you eaten anything today?" The question caught her off guard, so simple, so sisterly. It cracked something loose in Julia's chest. "No," she admitted, suddenly realizing she hadn't eaten since her rushed breakfast at school. "I'll bring food." And Julia. Camilla paused. "Whatever happened, we'll figure it out." The call ended, and Julia stared at her phone, thumb still hovering above the screen. She thought of summers long past. Blanket forts, whispered secrets, promises to always be there. When had they stopped keeping those promises? When had they become near strangers sharing DNA, but not lives? Time moved oddly in the motel room. Julia graded essays, red pen gliding across student papers about the Great Gatsby, marking thoughts on betrayal and shattered dreams while her own green light faded across the metaphorical bay. A knock jolted her from her thoughts. Through the peephole, Camilla. Impeccable in a charcoal blazer and crisp white blouse, holding a takeout bag from that old diner they used to visit as kids. Julia opened the door. For a long second, they simply looked at each other. Camilla looked exactly the same and completely different. Her honey blonde hair was shorter now, in a sleek corporate bob. A faint scar still lined her left eyebrow, catching the light, the one Julia had left there years ago when she pushed her off the treehouse ladder. "You're pregnant." Camilla's eyes widened as she took in Julia's belly. 7 months, Julia said softly, one hand instinctively resting on her stomach. Camilla's expression changed, something fierce, protective, flashing in her slate blue eyes. She set the bag down and did something she hadn't done in years. She hugged her sister. It was awkward at first, stiff from time and distance. But they didn't let go. But then Julia began to cry, and Camilla's arms tightened around her. He cheated, Julia whispered into her sister's shoulder. With his ex-intern. I'm so stupid, Cammy, so stupid. No, Camilla said firmly, he's the stupid one. She pulled back, her hands resting on Julia's shoulders, eyes searching her face. Pack your things, you're coming home with me. But your schedule, your routine. Julia knew how much her sister relied on the careful rhythm of her life. That's less important than you, Camilla said simply, already gathering Julia's scattered belongings. My guest room is yours as long as you need it. We'll figure the rest out tomorrow. As they packed, Julia watched her sister's methodical movements, the way she folded clothes with precise corners, how she made notes on her phone of everything they'd need. Some things never changed. But something had shifted. Like a key finally turning in a lock long rusted shut. She couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between them. Camilla, composed, decisive, unshaken, moving with practiced efficiency, and Julia, scattered, uncertain, still clinging to pieces of a life that had just shattered. There was a part of her that envied her sister's ability to take charge so effortlessly, a part that wondered if she'd ever been that capable, that sure of herself. But beneath Camilla's usual calm, Julia could see it now, the subtle tremble in her sister's hand, the way she blinked too fast as if holding back tears. For the first time in years, Julia understood. Camilla wasn't just fixing, she was feeling. And that made Julia's own strength rise in her chest like a wave. There was no need for dramatic words between them anymore. The silence was thick with shared history, regret, and the quiet beginning of something repaired. The silence between them, once filled with old wounds and distance, now felt open, like it might be filled with something better. Outside, the October wind rustled through nearly bare trees, carrying away the last pieces of the life Julia thought she had. Tomorrow she would have to deal with practical things. Her students, her job, her broken marriage. But tonight, she let herself follow her sister. Down a path they both should have taken long ago. Camilla's townhouse in Portland's Alphabet District was a world apart from Julia's warm, slightly cluttered home. With its clean lines, minimalist design, and carefully curated art, the space spoke of a life rooted in control and intention. Julia sat at the kitchen island the next morning, her fingers tracing the cool marble. Across the room, her sister moved with exacting grace. Coffee brewed at precisely 6:15 a.m. Overnight oats were portioned into glass containers. Running shoes sat in a neat row by the door. I cleared out half the closet in the guest room, Camilla said, measuring beams with scientific precision. And I put some pregnancy-safe toiletries in your bathroom. She moved briskly, ticking off details. Cleaning service comes Thursday. I already added you to the building's security list. You didn't have to do all this, Julia said quietly. Of course I did, Camilla replied, her tone matter-of-fact as she paced. It was a habit she had when her emotions were too big to sit still. Have you thought about what you want to tell the school? The question hit like a punch. Julia's hand went instinctively to her belly, where her daughter was stretching and rolling, already active for the day. I can't face them yet. The whispers, the looks. Her voice trailed off as her phone buzzed again. Another message from Ethan. Camilla's eyes narrowed. Give me that. Julia hesitated, then handed it over. Camilla's fingers flew over the screen, typing a short message to the school principal, an emergency request for personal leave. There, she said, setting the phone back down. You've got 2 weeks to figure things out. Then she stopped pacing. And Julia, you need to talk to a lawyer. A lawyer. The word sat heavy in Julia's mouth. Cold, final. It made everything terrifyingly real. Yes, a lawyer. Camilla's tone softened just a little. Actually, I might know someone who can help. He's good with sensitive situations. Before Julia could answer, her phone lit up. Ethan's face filled the screen. His photo taken at the coast last summer, blue eyes bright with what she once thought was love. Now she wondered if he'd already been thinking of Betrayal. Camilla snatched the phone before Julia could react and declined the call. He lost the right to your attention when he lost his pants in your bedroom, she said flatly. She began typing another list on her phone, muttering under her breath. Lawyer, prenatal records transfer, new bank account. Cammy, Julia's voice broke. I can't do this. Camilla stopped pacing. For a moment, she looked almost uncertain, like comforting her sister wasn't something that fit neatly into her usual routine. Then she pulled out the chair beside Julia and sat down, their shoulders just touching. "Remember when Dad left?" Camilla's voice was quiet. "You were 12, I was 15. Mom unraveled, and we thought everything was over." Julia nodded, remembering those cold, hollow dinners and the way their mother stared at nothing for hours. "But we survived." Camilla reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We made our own traditions. Sunday pancakes, holiday movies, those awful Christmas cookies we tried to bake." "They weren't that bad," Julia said weakly, a faint smile breaking through. "They were terrible," Camilla laughed softly. "But that's not the point." She turned to face her sister, fully focused now. "The point is, you're stronger than you think, we both are. And this time, you're not a scared kid. You're a grown woman, about to be a mom, and you've got me." The words lingered in the air, thick with the weight of all the years and silence between them. Julia felt her baby kick like an answer. "I've lost everything, Cammy," she whispered. "Ethan." "No," Camilla said, voice steady. "You've lost a cheating husband and a house, that's it. You haven't lost your job or your dignity or your family, and you're about to gain something better. A daughter." Julia's eyes filled again, not just with grief this time, but with something else, something steadier. Gratitude. For the sister who had once felt like a stranger, now the one anchoring her in the storm. The baby moved again, a tiny jolt that reminded her what she was fighting for. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was rebuilding, deliberately, with people who stayed. A knock at the door interrupted them. Camilla checked her watch and nodded. "Right on time. That'll be Cassian." "Oh, the lawyer I mentioned. He squeezed you in before his court appearance this morning." Camilla stood, smoothing her blazer. "He's good, Julia. He'll help you protect yourself and the baby." Julia watched her sister walk to the door, heels tapping against the hardwood. Even in the middle of chaos, Camilla moved with precision. She didn't just offer comfort, she offered control, direction, a way forward. Maybe that's what Julia needed right now. Not just a sister, an anchor. The door swung open to reveal a tall man in a charcoal gray suit. His dark hair was peppered with silver at the temples. His green eyes were clear and sharp, scanning the room as he stepped inside. With careful consideration, Julia suddenly felt self-conscious in her oversized sweater and leggings, painfully aware of the tear tracks on her cheeks and the loose strands of hair falling from her bun. "Julia," Camilla said, her tone clipped and professional. "This is Cassian Dorn. He's going to help us figure out your next steps." As Cassian stepped into the townhouse, Julia noticed how he nudged the welcome mat straight with the toe of his shoe. A subtle but telling gesture of precision. His presence didn't overwhelm the room like Ethan's always had. It didn't demand attention. It simply held it. "Mrs. Crowley," he began, then quickly corrected himself at Camilla's sharp glance. "Ms. Madden, shall we discuss your options?" Cassian Dorn's quiet authority transformed Camilla's pristine living room into a temporary law office. He took the armchair opposite Julia, placing his leather briefcase on the coffee table and flipping it open with practiced ease. His fingers idly traced the rim of his water glass, a habit Julia would later recognize as a sign he was deep in thought. "First," he said, his voice calm, deliberate, "everything you say stays in this room, even from your sister, if that's what you prefer." He glanced toward Camilla, who stood at the window with her arms crossed. "She can stay?" Julia said quickly, her posture unconsciously matching her sister's. "I don't want any more secrets." Cassian nodded and pulled out a yellow legal pad. "Tell me about the marriage, assets, accounts, property ownership. Then we'll talk about the infidelity." The word hit like a slap. Julia flinched. Camilla moved closer, her hand hovering near Julia's shoulder, steady and unspoken in its support. "The house is in both our names," Julia began, relying on her teacher's instinct for structure. "We bought it 3 years ago. The mortgage, most of the down payment came from Ethan's work bonus that year." "And your income?" "My teaching salary goes into our joint account." She hesitated, thinking of old arguments, his dismissive attitude whenever money came up. "Ethan's company, Cascade Events, it's doing well. He always said I didn't need to worry about the details." Something shifted in Cassian's eyes. He put his pen down, leaning forward just slightly. "Miss Madden, in your line of work, You teach students to read between the lines. What would you say to a student analyzing a character who keeps financial details from their partner? The question landed like a stone in Julia's chest. She thought of the many times Ethan changed the subject, the vague answers, the way he always brushed off her concerns. "I'd tell them to look for patterns of control," she said quietly. "Exactly." Cassian made a quick note, his handwriting clean and sharp. "We'll need a complete financial picture. Bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds. Oregon follows an equitable distribution model, so—" A sudden knock at the door interrupted him. Cut him off. Camilla moved toward the door, but froze at the sound of a voice calling from the hallway. "Julia, I know you're in there. Please, baby." Ethan's voice made Julia's heart race. Her hands flew instinctively to her belly as her daughter kicked hard in response to the sudden stress. Cassian's demeanor shifted in an instant. Gone was the calm, conversational lawyer. In his place stood someone sharp, composed, ready. "Miss Rose," he addressed Camilla, "does your building have security?" "Yes," she answered, already pulling out her phone, typing rapidly. "But he must have followed someone in." "Julia, sweetheart," Ethan's voice cracked, rising just enough to cut through the door. "I made a mistake. Please, we can fix this. Think about the baby." The words struck Julia like a blow. She began to stand, an old habit kicking in, the instinct to fix, to explain, to make peace. But then she met Cassian's steady gaze. "This is a crucial moment," he said quietly. "How you respond now sets the tone for everything that follows. You don't owe him an audience." "You're right," Julia whispered, sinking back into the couch. "You're right." "I've called building security," Camilla said firmly, "and I've already flagged him at the front desk as restricted." The pounding continued for another minute, Ethan's pleas becoming increasingly desperate. Julia didn't move. One hand rested on her belly, the other gripped the cushion beneath her. Her students' faces flashed in her mind, those moments she'd taught them about turning points, about the scenes that define a character's arc in literature. Was this hers? Finally, voices in the hallway. A firm, professional tone. Security. Ethan's protests fading as he was escorted away. Only then did Julia exhale. "Well," Cassian said, adjusting his tie, "that brings us to our next step. We need to file for a temporary restraining order." "Isn't that a bit extreme?" Julia asked, though even as she spoke, she saw Ethan's eyes again, the way they had looked through the peephole, unhinged and pleading. "What's extreme is him showing up unannounced at your sister's home," Cassian replied, his voice even. "The restraining order protects you and your child. It also creates a legal record of this behavior." "Do it," Camilla said immediately. When Julia glanced at her, Camilla added, "You didn't see your face just now, Jules. You were terrified." Cassian reached back into his briefcase, pulling out a new stack of forms. His movements were steady, reassuring. "We'll also file for temporary financial support. You'll need a separate bank account, one he can't access. And given your condition, medical coverage is a priority." As he spoke, outlining steps and strategies, Julia felt something shift deep inside her. The paralysis of betrayal was beginning to loosen, replaced not by healing, not yet, but by something that might come before it, understanding. "I have one question," Julia said, interrupting Cassian mid-explanation about the court filing timeline. "Oh?" He paused, fingers still resting on his water glass. She saw something flicker in his expression, unguarded, brief. "Why did you become a family lawyer?" The question caught him off guard. His hand stilled. For a moment, Julia glimpsed something unpolished, something real. "Because everyone deserves a chance to rewrite their story," he said at last, "even when others try to write it for them." Their eyes met, and Julia saw her pain mirrored in his, softened by time, shaped by intention. She thought of her unborn daughter, and the story she would one day tell her. A story about strength, dignity, and choosing yourself when it mattered most. A story that didn't begin with betrayal, but with bravery. With a woman who had been broken but refused to stay that way. And with the people who stood beside her while she stitched herself whole. Still, underneath the resolve, a flicker of unease stirred. Was it wrong to feel steadier already? Her daughter hadn't even been born. Yet Julia was rebuilding, reconnecting, even smiling some days. It felt disloyal somehow. As if healing too soon meant forgetting. As if moving forward meant leaving something behind she hadn't fully mourned. "Okay," she said, reaching for the stack of forms. "Show me where to sign." The days at Camilla's townhouse settled into an unexpected rhythm. Each morning, Julia woke to the familiar hum of her sister's treadmill downstairs, a rhythmic beat that had become oddly comforting. Through the guest room window, she watched Portland stir awake. Joggers in the park across the street, business people heading toward the train station, baristas arranging patio chairs outside the cafe on the corner. That particular morning, Julia sat at the kitchen island, grading late assignments her students had submitted via email. The routine helped. Her red pen hovered over essays on the scarlet letter. Hester Prynne's quiet strength felt more personal now. "You're wearing my sweater," Camilla said, stepping into the kitchen, still in her workout clothes. She didn't sound annoyed, just observant. Julia glanced down at the oversized gray cashmere. "Sorry, none of my clothes feel right anymore. Everything from before feels tainted." Camilla didn't respond right away. She pulled out her phone and began typing, adding maternity shopping to today's list, and maybe some post-baby transition pieces. She paused. "That's what they're called, right? I've been researching." The confession hit Julia in the chest harder than she expected. Her throat tightened. There was something deeply intimate in that admission. Camilla, the planner, the perfectionist, digging into motherhood not for herself, but for Julia. It wasn't just logistics, it was love. Silent and steady, showing up in spreadsheets and skincare recommendations. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from Cassian. "Court filing completed. Temporary orders in place. Hearing scheduled for Tuesday. Are you free to review details this afternoon?" Julia turned the screen toward Camilla, who was already glancing at her calendar. "I can move my 3 p.m. call," she offered. "No," Julia said, straightening her back, summoning her teacher voice. "I need to do this alone. I have to learn how to manage these things by myself." "Doesn't mean you have to," Camilla replied quietly. She started pacing, bare feet silent against the hardwood. "Maybe that's what got us here in the first place, both of us, trying to handle everything alone." The words settled heavily between them. Julia thought of Camilla at 15, carrying their fractured family on her narrow shoulders after their father left. Of herself, years later, determined to prove she could build a life without asking for help. The marriage had looked perfect, its flaws masked by cheerful social media posts, but behind the filters and hashtags was Ethan's growing emotional distance. "I used to watch you, Julia said softly. "In high school. The way you just handled everything. Mom's depression, the bills, college apps." Camilla stopped pacing. "I wasn't strong," she said. "I was scared. I thought if I could control every little thing, nothing else would fall apart." She exhaled, shaking her head. "But something always does, doesn't it?" "Maybe that's okay," Julia murmured, one hand resting on her belly as her daughter stirred with a slow stretch. "Maybe we're stronger when things fall apart, and we rebuild them differently." Their eyes met. Years of rivalry, resentment, and misunderstanding cracked open, like peeling paint, revealing something real underneath. The moment was interrupted by a buzz. Text from Cassian. "Brought case files to the cafe across from your building. Join if you'd like. Coffee's decent, though they arranged their sugar packets chaotically." Julia smiled at the dry humor. "He says he's judging the condiment display," she told Camilla, amused. "He would," Camilla said knowingly. "He rearranged the magazines in my waiting room by publication date once. I've seen him do it." Julia gathered her papers and slipped them into her bag. At the door she paused. "Cammy, thank you. For the sweater. For everything." "Go," Camilla said, shooing her gently, but her voice was warm. "Go learn how to fight back." The crisp autumn air brushed Julia's cheeks as she crossed the quiet street. Through the cafe window, she spotted Cassian at a corner table, aligning sugar packets while reading from a stack of documents. The sight made her smile. He stood as she approached, pulling out a chair. "I took the liberty of ordering you chamomile tea," he said. "Caffeine alternatives are important in the 3rd trimester." "You've been researching pregnancy too?" The words left Julia's mouth before she could catch them. Cassian's cheeks flushed slightly. "I like to be thorough in understanding my client's circumstances." He cleared his throat and opened the folder in front of him. "Now about Tuesday's hearing." "Why do you do that?" Julia asked, cutting him off, gesturing to the meticulously aligned sugar packets. "Create order in small things?" His hands paused. He considered, then answered quietly, "Because sometimes Small order is all we can control. My ex-wife used to call it annoying. Maybe she was right? I don't think so, Julia said, thinking of Camilla's color-coded grocery lists and her own perfectly mapped-out lesson plans. Sometimes small order is what helps us face bigger chaos. Their eyes met across the table, and in that quiet space, something shifted. Not romance. They were both too broken for anything romantic, but what passed between them was something else. Recognition. A shared understanding of wounds and the small rituals that kept them afloat. Tuesday, Cassian said at last, his voice softer. We're going to start bringing order to your chaos. Are you ready? Julia thought of Ethan. Of Betrayal. Of the life she once believed was perfect. She thought of Camilla's unwavering steadiness. Of her daughter turning inside her like a compass, always pointing forward. Yes, she said. I'm ready. The Multnomah County Courthouse loomed ahead, its stone facade austere against the cloud-streaked morning sky. Julia adjusted the navy blue maternity dress. Camilla had insisted on the color. Power colors matter in court, her sister had declared, dropping it into their shopping cart with finality. At the top of the courthouse steps, Cassian waited. Briefcase in one hand, the thermos in the other. Peppermint tea, he explained, handing it to her. Helps with nausea. Court days can be rough. The gesture nearly unraveled her composure. But before she could thank him, another voice pierced the crisp October air. Julia. Ethan strode across the courthouse plaza, his attorney, a severe-looking woman in an impeccably tailored suit, struggling to match his pace. He was sharply dressed in a gray suit, polished shoes gleaming, but his eyes were wild, unsteady. Cassian stepped forward, positioning himself between them with calm precision. Mr. Madden, he said, all communication should go through counsel. But Ethan wasn't listening. You don't have to do this, he called. We can fix it. Think about our family, about the baby. Family, Julia repeated, her voice low and bitter. You mean the one you betrayed, or the one you're starting with Betrayal? Her words carried across the plaza, loud enough to turn heads. Inside her, the baby kicked sharply, matching the sudden heat rising in her chest. That was a mistake, Ethan said, desperation in every syllable. Betrayal meant nothing. I ended it. I fired her. Just come home. Julia's grip tightened on the thermos, drawing strength from its warmth. No, Ethan. The mistake was thinking you could treat me like I meant nothing. His attorney finally caught up, touching his arm gently. Mr. Madden, we agreed on professionalism. To hell with that, Ethan snapped. That's my wife, my child. The tension broke at the sound of firm footsteps and a calm voice. Is there a problem here? Julia turned to see Judge Harriet Monroe approaching. Her dark robes billowed slightly in the breeze. Her tone could have iced over a fire. No, Your Honor. Ethan's attorney jumped in quickly. We were just heading inside, separately. Judge Monroe's gaze sharpened. Mr. Madden, take the east entrance. Miss Madden, the west. As Ethan was led away by his lawyer, Julia caught something fleeting in his expression. Not just frustration or defiance, but fear. For the first time, she wondered if he was finally starting to realize what he'd lost. Inside the courtroom, Julia sat beside Cassian, acutely aware of Ethan several rows behind them. The proceedings moved in a blur. Legal phrases, procedural language, formal presentations. She listened as Cassian laid out evidence. Ethan's affair, the financial manipulation, the unannounced appearance at Camilla's building. It felt surreal until it was her turn to speak. Julia stood. Her voice wavered at first, but steadied as she faced the judge. Your Honor, I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because I need to create a safe and stable environment for my child, because I need to show my daughter what self-respect looks like. The words came from someplace deeper than her lungs, from every ignored instinct, every silenced protest, every moment she convinced herself she was overreacting. Inside her, the baby moved, as if adding her own voice to the testimony. Judge Monroe's ruling was clear and swift. Temporary support granted. Restraining order upheld. Exclusive use of joint accounts frozen until full financial disclosure. But it was her final words that hit Julia the hardest. Mr. Madden, the judge addressed Ethan. Your actions this morning demonstrate exactly why these measures are necessary. Miss Madden deserves to feel safe as she prepares for motherhood. I suggest you spend less time on grand gestures and more time considering your choices. Outside the courtroom, Camilla was waiting. She had slipped in quietly during the hearing and didn't ask questions. She simply wrapped an arm around Julia's shoulders, just like she used to when Julia was small and terrified of playground taunts. "Tea's cold," Julia said numbly, still gripping the thermos. "I know a place that does it better anyway," Cassian offered gently. "If you'd prefer to debrief somewhere less institutional." The three of them ended up at a small tea house 2 blocks from the courthouse. Julia watched as Cassian folded a napkin to prop up an uneven table leg, while Camilla silently aligned their phones in a perfect row on the tabletop. These quiet, precise gestures, attempts to create order in the chaos, made Julia's chest tighten. "You did well today," Cassian said, pouring her a fresh cup. "Better than well. You showed incredible strength." "It didn't feel like strength," Julia admitted. "It felt like survival." "Sometimes they're the same thing," Camilla said. Her voice was soft but certain. "Sometimes surviving is the strongest thing we can do." Julia placed both hands on her belly as her daughter shifted again. "Then we're both survivors, aren't we, little one?" She looked up at the 2 people beside her, her sister, her advocate, and realized something else. Camilla wasn't just her sister anymore. She was her friend again. Her lawyer, whose quiet support had gone far beyond legal guidance. Outside, autumn leaves swirled through golden afternoon light, their colors brilliant against the gray Portland streets. Julia watched them from the window, thinking about transformation, how sometimes the most beautiful changes come just before everything seems to fall apart. The teacher's lounge at Crestwood High buzzed with Monday morning energy. Julia stood in the doorway, one hand resting protectively over her now prominent belly, the other gripping her travel mug. 2 weeks of emergency leave had felt like both a lifetime and a blink. "Julia," Katie Marshall, her fellow English teacher, hurried over, then hesitated. "We've been so worried. Can I?" "You can hug me," Julia said with a soft smile. "The baby and I won't break." The embrace was warm, real, and exactly what she'd needed. As she pulled away, Julia noticed the room had quieted. Her colleagues pretended not to stare, not to whisper behind coffee cups. "I know there have been rumors," Julia said, her voice steady in that teacherly way that demanded respect. "Yes, Ethan and I are separating. Yes, I'm staying with my sister. And yes, I'm absolutely okay to be back." Principal Robert stepped forward, his brow knit with concern. "Are you sure? We can extend your leave if you need more time." "Actually," Julia said, setting her mug down, "I need this. My students, my classroom, this community, they're a part of who I am. Not just Ethan's wife or a soon-to-be mom, but Miss Madden, the teacher who makes sophomores cry over Macbeth and juniors fall in love with Jane Austen." She paused just a beat too long, just enough for the doubt to creep in. What if she wasn't ready? What if the strength she'd found these past weeks dissolved under fluorescent lights and well-meaning glances? For a flicker of a second, her fingers tightened around the handle of the mug, her gaze searching the lounge for an escape. But then, like an answer, someone near the coffee pot whispered, "She's back." And somehow, that simple statement anchored her. A ripple of laughter softened the tension. Her coworkers began to gather around, offering hugs, stories, and quiet nods of solidarity. Something eased in Julia's chest. This was her ground, her rhythm, her strength. Being here wasn't just a return, it was a reclaiming. Every familiar face, every crumpled paper on her desk, every squeaky chair was a reminder. She wasn't starting over, she was stepping back into who she had always been, only now with more to fight for. Later that evening, she sat on the floor of Camilla's living room, lesson plans spread across the coffee table. Her sister typed nearby on her laptop, the soft clicking of keys a soothing backdrop. "Cammy," Julia said, looking up. "Do you remember Mom's garden, after Dad left?" Camilla paused, her hands stilling. "The one that failed? Because she had no idea what she was doing?" Julia laughed. "Yeah, but she kept moving plants around, trying different spots, different flowers. She didn't stop until something bloomed." "Those stubborn marigolds," Camilla said, smiling faintly. "They popped up just when she was ready to give up." Julia rested a hand on her belly, feeling her daughter's gentle evening flutters. "I think I understand her now," she murmured. "Sometimes you have to let things die, so new things can grow." The doorbell rang, cutting through their quiet. Camilla checked her phone and smiled. "That'll be dinner. Cassian said you were craving Thai." "Cassian said?" Julia raised an eyebrow. "He texted to see how your first day back went." I may have told him you skipped lunch, Camilla said, walking toward the door. He's not exactly subtle with his concern. Cassian stood in the doorway, balancing not just a stack of Thai takeout, but also a towering folder of legal papers. Julia couldn't help but smile as she spotted 3 different kinds of prenatal vitamins peeking out of his bag. I was in the neighborhood, he said, though his office was clear across town. Thought we could review the property division proposal while you eat. They unpacked containers of pad thai and green curry across Camilla's dining table. Julia watched Cassian instinctively line up the chopsticks in perfect parallel. She caught Camilla hiding a grin as she pretended not to notice. How was school? Cassian asked, passing Julia a steaming cup of ginger tea, her favorite from the cafe. Different, Julia said, savoring a sip. Better than I expected. And the students? He prompted. Julia paused, thinking of their bright faces, of their quiet nods, their open notebooks, their essays on their eyes were watching God, and how they'd learned that sometimes a storm is the crucible for a voice. It feels especially relevant, she said, recalling Zora Neale Hurston's line. Cassian nodded knowingly. There are years that ask questions and years that answer. Julia was surprised. Look at you, borrowing from the library's English Lit section for context. Camilla snorted softly, though her eyes were warm. He really did. The evening settled into a comforting rhythm. A bite of green curry, a scan of legal clauses, laughter at Camilla's methodical separation of each basil leaf and pepper slice. In that unfolding moment, folding takeout boxes, sorting recycling, Julia felt something settle in her chest. This new arrangement of support and solidarity felt as natural as breathing. When Cassian left, he carried the empty containers away. Julia saw a flicker in his eyes. Not pity, not mere professional concern, but recognition. The look of someone who knew what it took to rebuild from wreckage. Later, as Julia prepared for bed, she overheard Camilla in the hallway, phone pressed to her ear. No, Mom, Camilla said firmly. She doesn't need casseroles. She's not sick. She's pregnant. And healing. Yes, there's a difference. Julia smiled, remembering their mother's failed marigold experiment. She sat at the edge of the bed, opened her laptop, and began to type. Dear baby girl, today I want to tell you about strength. Not the kind that never breaks, but the kind that learns how to grow back stronger. The kind that runs in our family's blood. The words felt like the first gift she could give her daughter. The truth about falling down and rising up. About the family that stays and the love that leaves. About finding your voice in the silence and your power in the fractures. Outside, Portland lights winked like distant stars. And somewhere, she knew, marigolds were blooming against the odds. November rain pounded against Camilla's townhouse windows as Julia packed the last of her things from Ethan's most recent delivery. Each box felt like the closing of a chapter. Photo albums, winter sweaters, her grandmother's handwritten recipe box. Then she paused at one final item, her wedding dress, still in its pristine garment bag. We can donate it, Camilla offered gently, watching Julia trace the lace with a trembling finger. Or sell it and put the money in the baby's college fund. Before Julia could answer, her phone buzzed. Not a message from Ethan this time, but from Betrayal. Her hands shook as she read the text. You should know the truth. It wasn't just a one-time thing. We've been together for over a year. He said he was going to leave you but kept making excuses. The baby, complicated things. I'm sorry, the world tilted. Over a year, which meant during their anniversary dinner. During the fertility appointments, during the moment they'd found out about the baby, all of it had been a lie. Jules. Camilla's voice came from far away. Julia handed her the phone without a word, then turned and vomited into the wastebasket beside the bed. Inside her, the baby kicked, hard, as if reacting to the sudden spike of pain and betrayal in her mother's body. I'll kill him, Camilla said flatly, scanning the message. She was already unlocking her own phone. No, better. I'll destroy his company. One anonymous tip to the state board about his creative accounting. Don't, Julia whispered, wiping her mouth with a trembling hand. He's still this baby's father. He doesn't deserve. It's not about what he deserves, Julia said, voice cracking. It's about who I am, who I want my daughter to see when she looks at me. Silence followed, except for the sound of the rain hammering the windows and Julia's uneven breaths. Then Camilla did something completely uncharacteristic. She swept her perfectly stacked boxes off the bed with a loud crash. Clothes and keepsakes scattered across the floor. "Camille, you're too calm," Camilla snapped, her carefully maintained composure fracturing. "You're treating this like a lesson plan, like something you can organize and file away. Sometimes you need to break things." She grabbed the wedding dress bag from the corner and shoved it into Julia's arms. "Break something?" Julia stared at it. She remembered how she'd felt wearing that dress, how Ethan had looked at her with what she thought was love, how young, how completely blind she'd been. A sob started deep in her chest and rose like fire. She ripped open the garment bag. The tearing of lace echoed through the room. Beads and silk tumbled like snow around her feet. She didn't stop, not until the gown lay in ribbons on the hardwood floor, until her tears matched the downpour outside, until her throat was raw from screaming. When it was over, she stood in the center of the chaos. Shattered boxes, shredded dreams, chest heaving. Camilla caught her as she crumpled, pulling her close, rocking her gently like she had when they were girls. "I've got you," she whispered. "I've got you." A knock at the front door startled them both. Through her tears, Julia recognized Cassian's voice downstairs, probably arriving for their scheduled review of the divorce paperwork. "I'll send him away," Camilla said, starting to stand. "No." Julia gripped her sister's hand. "No more hiding, no more fake smiles." She pushed herself up slowly, steadying one hand over her belly. This was what healing really looked like. Messy, raw, honest. When Cassian reached the bedroom doorway, he took in the scene without a word. The scattered clothes, the torn wedding dress, the tears still fresh on Julia's face. And then he did something that surprised them both. He loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, and began picking things up. "Tell me," he said softly, setting a fallen photo back into its frame, "what you need right now. Not what the law requires, not what anyone else expects, just what you need." Julia looked at Camilla, still sitting in the middle of the chaos, then at Cassian, his presence calm, his movements steady, anchoring. "I need." She paused, then drew a breath deep into her chest. "I need to write a letter to my daughter about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't holding it all together. It's letting yourself fall apart so you can rebuild better." Cassian nodded, something gentle and knowing in his eyes. "Then that's what we'll do." He reached into his coat and handed Camilla a card. "My friend owns a shredding company, for when you're ready to deal with the wedding photos properly." A laugh escaped Julia's chest, sharp and surprising. It wasn't quite joy, but it was something close to freedom. She looked around at the mess, not just the torn dress or scattered boxes, but the broken image of the life she'd tried so hard to preserve. And in its place, something stronger was beginning to form, like a flower pushing through concrete, like a truth that no longer needed to stay buried. "Okay," she whispered, wiping her eyes. "Let's clean this up, but the dress stays broken." "The dress stays broken," Camilla echoed, standing to help. Together, the three of them began to restore order, not to erase the pain, but to honor it, to turn it into something new, something real. The first snow of December fell gently outside the window of Julia's new apartment. After weeks of searching, she'd found a cozy two-bedroom place, just 10 minutes from Camilla's townhouse. The walls were mostly bare, but string lights twinkled in the corners. A half-decorated Christmas tree stood near the window, waiting for the weekend when Camilla would help her finish it. In the nursery, Julia sat in a rocking chair, surrounded by boxes of baby clothes and unopened shower gifts. A pen rested in her hand, her journal open on her lap. "My darling girl, today marks 8 months since everything changed. Your kicks are stronger now, like you're reminding me every day that new life comes after endings. Yesterday, I unpacked the last box from our old house. Inside, I found my old journals, the ones where I wrote about dreaming of being your mother." A sudden, sharper pain stopped her mid-sentence. She'd had Braxton Hicks contractions before. But this was different. More intense, more real. Her phone rang. Cassian's name lit up the screen. They'd been talking more often, about more than court dates and paperwork, about literature, about healing, about life. "I was just reviewing the final divorce documents," he said when she picked up. "There's only one last signature and—" He hesitated. "Julia, are you all right?" I think she's coming," Julia managed, clutching the kitchen counter as another contraction hit. She's not due for 2 more weeks. Try telling her that, she gasped, trying to breathe through the pain. Can you call Camilla? She's in a meeting, Cassian replied. But I'm on my way. Call your doctor. I'll handle everything else. Everything after that blurred. Cassian arrived first, his usual crisp presence a little undone, tie loosened, hair not quite in place. He helped Julia pack her hospital bag while dialing Camilla, who burst in 15 minutes later still in her blazer and heels, breathless but focused. They worked in tandem. Camilla timed contractions. Cassian handled logistics. Julia tried to remember how to breathe. At the hospital, reality hit hard. I can't do this, she whispered, her voice cracking as they waited for the doctor. I'm not ready. I'm still broken. Hey, Camilla said, taking her hand, her grip strong and sure. You're not broken. You're transforming, like those butterflies you teach your students about, the ones that have to break free of the chrysalis to become stronger. Another contraction gripped Julia's body. As it subsided, she noticed Cassian stepping into the hallway, giving them space. But Camilla called him back. You're part of this too, she said. If you want to be. Cassian met her gaze and nodded. The look between them, quiet, certain, spoke volumes. Julia reached for both their hands as the next contraction built. Hours passed in a haze of pain, pressure, and pushing. Doctors came and went, nurses checked machines. Through it all, Julia held tight to her anchors. Camilla's unshakable strength, Cassian's silent steadiness. Then a nurse peeked in. There's someone else here. Julia looked up. Ethan stood in the doorway, face pale. I have a right to be here, he said, but his voice lacked weight. I'm the father. Before Camilla or Cassian could speak, Julia found her voice. No. Ethan stepped forward. Julia, please. No, she said again, stronger despite her exhaustion. You have legal rights, and will honor them after she's born. But this moment, this is mine. This is for the people who held me together when you broke me apart. Something shifted in Ethan's eyes. A flicker of realization, maybe, of what he'd truly lost. He didn't argue, he turned and walked away. The next contraction was the fiercest yet. Julia gripped Camilla's hand, felt Cassian's steady palm on her shoulder. Tell me the story again, she panted. About Mom's garden, the marigolds. Camilla smiled through tears. How they bloomed just when she was ready to give up. Because sometimes, Cassian added gently, the most beautiful things grow in unexpected places. Julia closed her eyes and pulled strength from their words, their hands, their hearts. She thought of her students, of their essays on transformation, of torn wedding gowns and fallen pearls, of sisters rebuilding bridges, of quiet men who straighten sugar packets and somehow know how to hold a broken heart without asking for pieces. Ready to push? The doctor asked. Julia opened her eyes. She looked at her sister. Camilla's fierce, unwavering love, at Cassian's steady presence, at her own reflection in the window. Not a woman broken by betrayal, but rebuilt in resilience. Ready, she said, and began to bring her daughter into the world. Dawn painted the hospital room in soft winter light. In Julia's arms, her newborn daughter slept peacefully, securely. Lily Grace Madden, named for flowers that grow even through cracks, even in hard places, her tiny fingers curled around her mother's thumb. She's got your determination, Camilla said from her chair by the window, her usually flawless appearance undone by joy and exhaustion. Did you see her fight the swaddle? Julia smiled, tracing her daughter's perfect nose. But she's got your chin, that little stubborn set right there. She glanced at her sister. Mom's chin definitely runs in the Madden women. Camilla moved closer, brushing a hand over Lily's soft dark curls. Another fighter for the family. The door opened gently. Cassian stepped in, balancing 3 paper cups of tea and a brown bag that smelled like actual food. His shirt sleeves still rolled, his tie long since discarded. He hadn't left Julia's side through labor, except briefly to handle paperwork. The nurses will be in with the discharge papers soon, he said, setting everything down. And I spoke to the school. They're extending your leave through the semester. With full pay. Camilla raised an eyebrow, accepting her cup. How did you manage that? Let's just say, the board is eager to avoid even the appearance of pregnancy discrimination. His smile was small, but knowing. Julia watched as he aligned the teacups neatly on the side table, then subtly straightened the already perfect curtain by the window. His old habits, once quirks, now felt like anchors. "I have something for her," he said, pulling an envelope from his briefcase. "Well, for both of you." Inside, a journal. Beautifully bound, the leather soft and unfinished. "For the letters," he explained. "The ones you've been writing her. I thought they deserved a proper home." The gift cracked something open. Tears welled again, but they were different this time. Not the tears she'd shed for Ethan, not grief, not loss. These were for beginnings. A knock interrupted the moment. The nurse entered with paperwork, and behind her, Julia's breath caught. Ethan. He stood in the doorway holding a plush pink teddy bear, expensive and personal. He cleared his throat. "I wanted to see her, and sign the papers." Julia felt Camilla stiffen beside her, saw Cassian's quiet step forward, protective without being overt. But something in Julia had shifted. The birth had changed everything. Looking at Ethan now, she didn't feel pain, only distance. He seemed smaller, dimmed by the brilliance of the life she held in her arms. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. Ethan stepped forward cautiously, as if afraid to shatter the moment. When he looked down at Lily, his face changed, just briefly. Wonder, regret, something fragile and real. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "Yes," Julia said, not looking at him but at Lily. "She is." "She is," Julia said firmly, her voice clear. "And she's going to grow up knowing she's worthy of real love, honest love." Ethan nodded. He understood the meaning behind her words. He set the teddy bear down, signed the discharge papers the nurse handed him, and left without another word. But as he turned, Julia's gaze followed him, not with longing, not anymore, but with a tangle of feelings she hadn't prepared for. There was grief, buried deeper than she thought. A strange ache for the man he'd pretended to be, for the nights they once dreamed of this very moment, leaving the hospital together with their first child. And now here he was, a stranger at the door. Her heart didn't break again, but it did flinch. Just once. Quietly. It felt like the quiet closing of a book, not with a slam, but with a soft, final click. That afternoon, as they prepared to leave the hospital, Julia sat in the wheelchair required by hospital policy, Lily cradled gently in her arms. Camilla fussed over the diaper bag, reorganizing it for the third time. Cassian stood nearby, speaking softly to the nurse, jotting down follow-up care instructions in his small, precise handwriting. "Ready to go home?" Camilla finally asked, satisfied with the layout of the bag. Julia looked at her daughter, at her sister, at Cassian. She thought of her new apartment. Cozy, warm, still half-decorated for Christmas. Of her classroom and the students waiting for her return. Of the handmade mobile they'd sent for the nursery. Of the stories yet to be written. Of all the pieces of her life that had once felt scattered, now slowly realigning into something unfamiliar but hers. Not the life she planned, but the one she chose. "Actually," she said, "I think I've been home for a while now. I just needed to find my way to it." As they stepped outside, snow began to fall, soft and new. Julia thought of another snowy day, years ago, walking down the aisle toward what she believed was her forever. She'd been wrong then, but not now. In her arms, Lily stirred, opened her eyes filled with the kind of wisdom only brand new life holds. The kind that whispers of things not yet lived. Julia thought of the letter she would write that night, in the journal Cassian had given her. "My dearest Lily, today you taught me that love isn't always what we expect. Sometimes it's a sister's fierce protection, sometimes it's a friend's quiet strength. Sometimes it's the way light dances on snowflakes, or how silence, when it's real, holds peace instead of pain. But most of all, it's this. The perfect weight of you in my arms. The certainty that, no matter what comes next, we'll face it together. You were worth every broken piece. Every painful step, every tear, and every triumph that led to you. Because sometimes, my darling girl, our happily ever after just needs a different kind of beginning." The snow kept falling as they made their way, not to a fairy tale ending, but something better. Something real, something earned, messy, beautiful, imperfect, possible. 3 years later, spring sunlight streamed into Julia's classroom as she pinned another student's essay to the published author's wall. Her creative writing elective had become the most requested course at Crestwood High, a place where students learned their voices mattered, that their stories were worth telling. "Miss Madden," a familiar voice called from the doorway. Lily, now 3, perched on Camilla's hip, reached out with chubby hands. She had her aunt's stubborn chin, her mother's dark curls, a perfect mix of determination and joy. "There's my literary critic," Julia said, smiling, as she took her daughter into her arms. "How was your lunch date with Aunt Cammy?" "We had sushi," Lily beamed, "and I used chopsticks all by myself." Camilla raised an eyebrow. "Well, she used them to drum on the table, but it's progress." Julia smiled, noticing her sister's subtle glance at the clock. "You're going to be late for your meeting." "Actually," Camilla adjusted her blazer, "it's not a meeting. Cassian's taking me to look at office spaces. I'm finally starting my own consulting firm." "Finally?" Julia said, hugging her sister with her free arm. They'd spent countless nights dreaming of this moment over cups of tea and cartons of Thai takeout while Lily arranged her blocks on the floor, always in perfect lines, just like her honorary uncle. "Speaking of whom, Uncle Cass is coming to dinner," Lily declared proudly. "He promised to read Where the Wild Things Are and do all the voices." Julia and Camilla exchanged a knowing look. Over the last 3 years, their little family had grown in unexpected ways. Cassian had become more than Lily's favorite storyteller. He was their constant, their calm in chaos, the one who still straightened sugar packets and understood the unique rhythm of their lives. That evening, in Julia's garden-level apartment, Lily sat between Cassian's feet as he read the bedtime classic. His usually reserved voice grew animated, growling, roaring, letting the wild rumpus start. At the dining table, Camilla worked on her business plan, occasionally chiming in with sound effects. Julia watched them from the kitchen, adding the final lines to her manuscript, a memoir built from the letters she had once written to Lily. A story about motherhood, survival, and the family we choose. Her agent believed the book would help other women find their voice. On the windowsill, a pot of marigolds bloomed, bold, golden, defiant against the spring sky. A reminder that even in the hardest seasons, beauty could take root. "Mommy," Lily called. "Come roar with us." Julia set down her pen and joined her daughter, her sister, and the man who had helped her find her way back to herself, in a joyful, wild dance. Laughter echoed through rooms that had once held only silence. Dear friend, if you're standing in the quiet after a storm, unsure, heart still raw, wondering what's next, I want you to know, you are not alone. Like Julia, maybe you didn't ask for the falling apart, but you get to choose what grows from it. The Stoics remind us, what stands in the way becomes the way. Pain is not the end of the road, it's the ground where courage takes root. So take the step, however small, fold the broken pieces into something braver. And if all you did today was survive, then that is enough. You are not where you were. And that is everything. If this story touched you, please give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of our strength. Your next beginning could start right here.